Okay, so let's talk about Redux. I mean, one of the things that we could end up doing is that we could build a new application, new web pack, and start looking at Redux. But we have an app here. Let's start looking at Redux, and we'll do it just in the context of this current application. So one of the things that we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to bring Redux into our application. So this I found a little strange here, but what we're going to do here and I'm going to specify, this is kind of an interesting thing. Because this screwed me up, so let's just see what happens here. I'm going to bring in from Redux. Of course, we don't have Redux installed. This will end up breaking. npm install Redux, save. So one of the things I want to do here is let's do console.log Redux, see what it is. Really? Let's try this one more time. Okay, so that ended up building. Let's look at this. So this is a little bit weird. You know, there's no sort of default import here for Redux. This sort of confused me a little bit. So one thing you could always do here, I'm not totally comfortable with this syntax, is that you could do something like, hey, look, bring everything in. You call it whatever you want to. Import star as foo. Let's rerun that. And so now, if you look at it, you can actually, what this tells you is tells you the things you could end up importing. I don't know why this is the case. I just sort of discovered this, earlier tonight. But one of the things that you're seeing is that things that you want to do with Redux is that there are two things we're going to use in Redux. We want to create a Redux store, okay? And we also want to use some Redux middleware. So having said that, instead of actually bringing in, and I could do that and use foo, but let's actually be more specific and use our named imports. At least we can see what we're naming here, and we'll bring in create store from Redux. And if we do console.log, we could say create store. Okay. Let's try that one more time. Sometimes a little bit slow. So here's our create store. Now, obviously this is a function. We could actually look at the source code if we want to. But Redux is kind of interesting. And the way that Redux works is that it's based upon what are called reducers. Okay? And a reducer is a very simple function. Okay? A reducer is a function that takes two arguments. The first argument is the incoming state. Okay? We'll find out it could also be the incoming slice of state. Okay? But we can think about it and say, hey, look, the incoming state in our reducer, we can end up grabbing, okay? And we get an action. And you could basically do anything you want to with your application with those actions. So let's think about a couple of actions we could do. Let's create a reducer. Okay? So I'm going to create a reducer. I'm going to call this employees reducer. Okay? And I told you a reducer takes two functions. A reducer takes two arguments. A state, and an action. Okay? Now it's up to you to basically decide what in that action you want to do. Now, you could probably set this up however you want to set it up, but let's just make this real simple here. First of all, if I just create a new store by specifying, and this would be totally legit here, is to say constant store equals create store from an employee reducer. Okay? The reducer basically is going to determine what your store is, given you have some starting point. Okay? So if your store has a collection of items, okay, if the state currently has a collection of items and you want to add an item, you don't just push to that collection of items. The most important thing about reducers is that if there is a change, you don't mutate. Okay? You end up returning a new state. Anything we do in this reducer is a pure function. Okay? Meaning nothing gets changed. We send something in, okay? We don't change anything, we create something new. That's what a pure function is. Very predictive, no side effects. Okay? We don't send something in and modify it. Okay? We create something new. And again, what's the rationale behind that? Well, the rationale behind that is this way that React Redux could take a look and very easily look at your state and say, hey, look, do I need to worry about this? Okay? Do I have a new object? If it's the same object, I know I'm cool because, hey, you can't change an object in a reducer. Okay? You don't modify an object. This is why, if you've ever done anything, I don't know how far you guys end up getting with Angular. I didn't look at too much of your code for your capstones. But if you ever had to go and do a watch and say, hey, look, I want to watch this object to see if anything changes, okay? If you were just watching the object and you didn't change the object, nothing would end up changing. But there's actually a little flag you can say to Angular, hey, look, watch the object and actually see if any of the properties change. Now, you can imagine if you have an object with a ton of properties, to actually query that object to see if anything ended up changing can be a pretty expensive operation. Okay? So Redux just says, hey, look, nothing changed, I'm good, I got nothing to really worry about. Okay? So how could we end up writing a reducer? Well, first of all, let's give our state a default value. So one of the things you could do with ES6 is to say, look, if you call this and you didn't end up passing in a state, I'm going to start out with an empty state. Okay? So the first time that this gets called, if there's nothing in the state, I've got an empty array. Now right off the bat, just between those two things, let me get rid of my other console.logs here.
So that'll only do that if there's no existence.
If there's no state existing, this is your initial state. So now if I go over here, and here's my reducer, and again, my reducer has to return a new state, okay? Or it could return, this is perfectly legitimate, nothing changed, it's just going to return, well, it'll just return the state. Okay? So if I go and look at this store and I say console.log store, and I say give me the state of yourself, store, and I go and run this, employee reducer, I called it employees reducer, probably employees reducer, right? The state it's dealing with, it's going to be dealing with a collection of employees. So now if I do this, it's an empty array. Okay? Now, what if I wanted to change my state? Let's say that a new employee gets inserted. Okay? Again, in reducers, no side effects, no AJAX calls, okay? No changes. Okay? You have to be very explicit with your action. If you want to add a new employee to the state, first of all, you better let me know that that's what you want to do. And if you want to add an employee to the state, you better give me an employee. I can't add one to the state if I don't have an employee. I can't make a call to some database. I can't do anything asynchronous. Okay? So what you'll end up seeing in reducers very commonly are switch statements. And the switch statements are going to look like this. We're going to switch on the action type. And if you haven't done switch statements a lot, you'll end up getting used to them with React. But we'll have a default here. And our default is going to be, hey, look, if we don't match anything else, we want to make sure, because again, the reducer will run, okay? If you don't return something from this reducer, your state's going to be undefined, okay? You have to return something from the reducer, so our default is going to be state. If we were to go and run this again, we would have an empty array. Now let's create an action. And so we'll say, hey, look, we have a case. And these are usually done in caps. Add employee. So when we have an add employee, what we're going to do is, again, we could go over here and we could say state.push. And again, the assumption is that if we are calling this and we're adding an employee, then our action better have an employee. And in this case, we would return our state. And if we end up doing this and we say, store, do me a favor. How do we want to push? I know. I'm gonna modify that. Good call. Okay, so how do we actually tell our store to make changes? Well, the way that we do that is a store has a method called dispatch. And what you dispatch to the store are actions. And our actions look very much like you'd imagine up here, where we're going to specify a type of add employee. And our employee is going to be an object. And in this case, our employee is going to be an ID of 1 and a name of Mo. Okay? And we'll go and get our state. We'll get our state. In fact, we'll get our state here, and we'll get our state here. All right? So when we first get our state, we've got nothing, and now we've got something with an ID of Mo. Okay? Let's do something else. Let's create another case, and we'll say remove employee. And what are we going to do when we remove an employee? Well, we'll do it the wrong way to start out with. We'll specify, let's see, we'll say state.splice, and we'll say state. It's a better way to do this. Well, I'm not going to do this yet. Let's actually do this. We'll call this again. We'll add another employee, and we'll say 2, and we'll say Larry. So now we've got Mo and Larry. Now again, we've got a problem here, and the problem that we have here is that we're dealing with side effects. Okay? So pure programming, if you remember Will's tech talk, pure programming says nothing gets mutated in a pure function. Pure functions are totally predictable. There's no calls to a database. Okay? Basically, your pure functions, whatever ends up going in, doesn't get mutated. So we don't want to mutate our state. Instead, we want to return a new state. So there's a nice ES6 way to do this. And what we could end up doing here is we could end up returning, this is kind of neat. ES6 has this operator called the spread operator. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say, hey, state, do me a favor, spread yourself. Okay? And that's basically just going to create a collection of whatever was in the state. So our state was an array, and we're spreading it out to individual elements. Okay? If we did this, that would be okay, but we wouldn't be adding anything. We want to add something, so we're going to end up adding our action .employee. Okay? Again, this needs to be a pure function. Nothing needs to get modified. What we're doing is we're creating a brand new, and that's what you have to do always, create a brand new state. There are other ways to do this. If we wanted to do this, we could have taken the old state, we could have concatenated this new value to it, and we could have ended up returning that. This will give us the same results, and it's a nice ES6 syntax. Any questions about this? Use the spread operator with ES6, see what happens. Send it in an array of 1, 2, and 3. Do the spread operator of 1, 2, 3, and then do 4. And you can have a new array of 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay?
How do you name an array that comes from a state object? I mean, that's right. If you want to name it.
How do you name? Well, this is no longer an array. This is spread out into individual items. There's nothing to name.
But you can name that new array.
I could name the array. I could name this. This would be totally legitimate to say const my new array and return that, and that will be the new state. Again, the way that the reducers end up working, the reducers are going to run. When you end up dispatching an action, the reducers are going to run to get the new state. Okay? And your store is keeping track of the state. But the only way the state changes is with reducers. And the reducers are pure functions. Very, very simple. Okay? So now if we end up doing that, we could go over here and run this. This will work the exact same way, but it gives us also the ability to go in here and say, hey, look, you know what? We want to have some method called remove employee. And when we end up removing an employee, I don't really even need the name here. I'm going to remove an employee with an ID of 1. Okay? And I want to look at what my state is. Now, right now, by the way, nothing's going to break, guys. I don't have an action for remove employee. That's fine. It goes in here. Again, the reducer comes in, okay, runs through the reducer. If your reducer function doesn't have a matching action, that's fine. You get back what? Whatever the state was before. You can dispatch something nonsensical. That's okay. Don't throw an error on it. Okay? Let it go through. Because in an application, you could actually have multiple reducers. Okay? So what I want to do here is I'm going to modify this, and I'm going to change this, and let's just make this a little bit cleaner. Right? We could name this, but we don't buy anything by doing it. And this is actually even a little bit easier. We're going to go over here, and we're going to say remove employee. Order doesn't matter. If you match remove employee, well, real simply, what we're going to do is we're going to use our filter function. Hey, state, we know state has a value. It's never coming in at null, right? Or undefined. Because if it was undefined, what would we have?
Yeah.
An empty array. Okay? So the state's going to end up coming in here, and we're going to filter it. State.filter. Our state is made up of employees. And when we go to filter it, we're going to say, hey, look, we want you, if your ID is not equal to the action's employee, the ID that we passed in. That's a new array. It's a non-mutated state. Real simple. Okay? It's the way that the reducers work. We could end up deleting a reducer. We could also take the case of maybe we decided to go and edit a object as well, right? If we wanted to do that, we would maybe find the object that we wanted to edit, okay? We don't want to mutate an array. We would generate a new array, and in the position where that other object was, we'd end up creating a new object. We're not going to do that here. We're going to keep this a little bit simple. But if we do this, we rerun this, we've now got one object, and this is just going to be Larry. Okay? So reducers are used, okay, to keep track of state. Reducers, by convention, have type. You can write your reducer however you want to write it. By convention, a reducer, an action has a type, okay? And that type is going to basically be you're going to end up switching on that type to determine what you want to do. Now, you can look at this and say, that's great, but what the hell am I going to end up doing with this thing? What if I want to go and make a database call with this thing? How am I going to end up doing it? If I can't have side effects, how am I going to end up working? Okay? Well, the nice thing about that is that if you have a store, what you can do to the store is that you could say to the store, now, we can't really do this yet, but just imagine that we could do this. Let's say that we have some function. Let me actually import, and I'm going to import $ from jQuery. And I'll go over here, and this is going to bomb out, okay? And let me do an npm install of jQuery, and I'll save it. No, because this is just the default value that's coming in from jQuery. Let's test it. Maybe you're right. Let's see. Console.log $. It couldn't just be that jQuery is big. That's why it takes a long time to load. There might be other ways to do this. But if I do that, there's my jQuery object. My jQuery object is going to allow me to do a GET request. Imagine I could do something like this. Imagine I could create a function. Get employees from server. And just use your imagination a little bit. Imagine that this function returned another function. And the function that it returned, just for the sake of argument, imagine that this function was passed a dispatch object. And just for the sake of argument, let me go up here and I'm going to add another employee. And this is going to be curly. Now let's just see what happens when I run that. And actually, even before I end up calling this, let me just show you one other thing. Instead of doing a console.log here, the other thing that a store has the ability to do is that if you have a store, you could say to your store, hey, look, store, I'm interested in when you change. Okay? When you end up changing, I would like to know about it. Okay? So a store can do two things. You can dispatch to a store, you can also subscribe to the store. So imagine, instead of doing the console.log, before we end up dealing with anything that's asynchronous, let's go in here and say, store, we want to subscribe to you with this function, and we'll log store get state. And if we end up doing that, what we should see is that every time the state changed, right, we added an item, we added another item, we removed an item. We're subscribing to the store. And the store is letting us know what? When the state ends up changing. Okay? How does the state change? New object. Pure functions end up coming back. Now imagine if I did something like this and I said, hey, look, you know what, store? Instead of passing you an object directly, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to dispatch to you a get employees from server. And I'm going to call this. Okay? I'm going to pass you a function. Okay? I'm going to call this function. This function is going to have another function. So what's going to end up getting passed here is going to be a function. And I go in here and I run this. And the error that I get is that, hey, look, I'm a very simple store, buddy. Okay? I'm a very simple store. The only thing you can do is give me actions. Okay? Don't try to give me a function. I don't want it. Okay? But what we're going to do is that if we end up putting in a piece of middleware there, what we can do with that middleware is we can use a piece of middleware. There's a piece of middleware called thump. And the way that thump middleware works is it says, hey, look, if we end up calling you and we give you a function, okay, call that function. Call that function and pass us the dispatch. And what we'll do is we'll do something asynchronously. And when we're done and when we're ready and we've done our asynchronous stuff, then we can call a simple action. So what can we do? We can go to the server. We can end up getting all of our employee objects, and we can end up, then when we're ready, we can dispatch and we can load our employees. So one thing that we can do here is something like this, where we have we don't have this yet. This is the most simple one, case, load employees. And here, we're just going to return action employees. This is going to be a new array of employees. This is going to be an array of employees that we end up getting from the server. And we're returning here, although I always like to put breaks in here, although we probably don't need it. Usually this barks at me if I don't. Okay? So again, nothing really changed here. We still don't have any middleware that's set up here. But you could imagine, just for the sake of argument, I'm going to take this last one out just so you could see it. And we'll go over here and I'll say, here, store.dispatch type load employees. And I'm going to say employees. Again, it's up to me to decide what to pass to my action. Just for the sake of argument. Doesn't make a lot of sense for our application, but I can get away with doing that. And if I do that, what I should find is that I've gone and basically reset my state. Okay? Again, state doesn't get mutated. And what I'm getting at here is what I want to do is I want to end up loading my employees from the server. Okay? Since it's from the server, I can't do this within the context of an action. But what I can do is I can do it within the action of a piece of middleware. So what I'm going to do here is that one thing that I end up getting from Redux, Redux gives me the ability to apply middleware. And the middleware that I'm going to end up using is something called, let me kill this. I'm going to say npm install. And what I'm going to end up getting here is going to be something called Redux Thunk. And I'm going to save it. That's the middleware that I want to bring in. That's going to be the Thunk middleware. And if I go up here, I'll say import. And I'm going to import Thunk from Redux Thunk. This is actually the middleware that I want to use here. And what this is going to allow me to do now, if I end up creating my store, a second parameter is my middleware. And I'm going to say, I want you to apply middleware. What middleware do you want? I want the Thunk middleware. Now again, what's going to happen here is that if I pass to my dispatch a function, okay, that function will end up getting called. Okay? That function will end up getting past that dispatch object. Now I've got the ability to do something asynchronously, and it's up to me to decide when I want to dispatch. What does that feel like a little bit? How about Express? Right? Remember Express when we started to actually get data from Sequelize? Right? It was asynchronous. And we had the response object, and it was up to us to decide when we wanted to send it. That's what's going to happen here underneath the covers. Again, it's a way of saying, hey, look, you know what? In the end, I have a simple action. I promise you. I've got a simple action. Okay? But I'm not going to be ready right away. Okay? This is a mechanism, a piece of middleware that's put in the pipeline that allows us to do this. So, again, behind the scenes, right, Redux is basically just passing the dispatch, and it's up to us to call it whenever we want to call it. So, if we end up doing that, run this again. Go back here, reload this, right? And let's actually go and uncomment this line here. Now it's kind of funny, right? That works, okay? Notice we started out at 1, 2, 3, 4. I called dispatch, okay? And I dispatched and I said I want to add a new employee, okay? If I comment out that line, and I go over here, and I go up here and I comment out this line. No problem, nothing is broken. I could have made an async call, I didn't. But I could have made an async call, okay, and nothing would have happened, right? It's up to me, I decide, it's my code, it's my thumb. These things are called thumbs. It's my thumb, I decide. Okay, when I'm ready. Maybe I'm making 2 AJAX calls. Okay, so let's make an AJAX call. And we'll make an AJAX call here. And so what we'll do is we'll say $AJAX. Actually, I think we could just do $get. And we'll end up going to API employees. And we'll use our promise syntax. This is going to get employees back. And we'll go over here. And once we end up getting our employees back, here we'll actually go and let's not add an employee, because if we're loading our employees from the server, we'll say load employees. And again, the signature of our action, that's up to us. Right? There's conventions for it, but it's up to us what we want to do. These are going to be these employees that we end up getting from the server. Yeah, I could put this on one. This could be a one-liner if I wanted. And if I go over here, so in this case, I think that'll work. Yeah, I see that. Oh, thank you. I thought you were talking about the semicolon. Sorry. Jeff, I know you said that too. All right. So if I end up doing that, this should end up working. I could break it down on multiple lines if I want to. But if I went to run this now, and let's clean this up a little bit. Let's take all this other stuff off because...
Doesn't that have to be employees too? Employees.
Yes, thank you. Right? Again, it doesn't make sense. If I have to know what my action type is expecting as a signature. So this is employees, and that's employees. And if we go and run this, let's see, I probably have another error here. So it doesn't like, why is it seeing that second colon still? I've seen that before. I don't know if it's just delayed or it's not watching correctly. Oh, so it doesn't like that semicolon. Let me fix that. Okay, so that built, and what I expect to see here is that it's going to make that AJAX call and get nothing back, so obviously nothing's going to change in my store. But really simply, I go back over here to my server, and I'll go up here, and I'm going to put in some fake data. Let employees equals an array, ID1, name equals Mo, 2, name is equal to Larry. And in fact, when you go and ask to get, and again, this could be a real API if I wanted it to be, API employees, request, response, I'm not going to worry about next, response.send employees. Thank you. So here, now, I've got my 2 employees for the server. So again, the big takeaway here, don't think that this is more complicated than it has to be. Reducers are very, very simple. You can look at a reducer, you can see exactly what the hell is going on. It's a pure function. I mean, there's calculation in there. Okay? Maybe I send a string when I'm adding employees, and I parse the string to find out what employees I'm adding. It's up to me if I want to write my code that way. Okay? But it's a pure function. There's nothing that's happening asynchronously. There's no promises. There's no call to anything. Okay? It's clear as day. Every time I run it, it goes in with the same input. I get the exact same output, and nothing gets mutated. Okay? That's a pure function. Will, that sounds like a pure function? Yeah? Okay. So now you see, why you're sort of using these pure functions again. This is basically Redux's way of saying, I know if something is changing because I'm going to see if that object changed. Doesn't change, none to broadcast. Okay? So now the question is going to be, how do I take this functionality, just like this, and use it in a Redux app? Let's just do one other thing here, just so we have these methods in here. Just so you could see it. Let's also do a get employee from server, in which case we're going to do a get, and let's go over here.
Dispatch is like a reserved keyword.
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I'm not aware of it. So when we want to get an employee from the server, we're going to pass an ID here. ID. We're going to call this method. We're going to get an employee back. And just for the moment, we'll say that this is going to be add employee. 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 Thank you. So now if I end up doing that, let's comment this out. And we'll go over here and we'll say we're going to specify get employee from server. Let's get Larry. An ID of 2. Again, this is how you end up passing data into a thunk. Right? This is our thunk function that we're getting back here. How do we know it's a thunk function? Because we are calling it with dispatch. And that's the only middleware that we have in our store. So now if we go and run this, we'll get an error. And the error is that we don't have this get method. This is very simple to do. Right? We're not going to deal with the database now. Here, let's just go over here and we're going to be very, very optimistic here. We're going to pass in an ID. And we'll say response.send. And we'll say employees.filter. What are we filtering on? Well, the employee, where the employee ID. And I'm just going to do the double equal sign as opposed to the triple equal sign because params come in as strings. So I'll say request params.id. That's our filter. And we'll end up getting back the first element here because that's what we're going to end up sending back. So we're going to send that back, and we'll do that get. Again, this is pretty messy. Ideally, we'd end up doing this with a database. But if we go to run that,
You need parentheses
where?
after employee, after the filter. You don't?
I don't think so. This is my filter.
Oh, yeah.
My filter has this function. Again, I'd be better off breaking this on multiple lines. I'm just doing it very quickly. But you know you have the ability to filter employees. So look, I got Larry. Let's do one more thing just so we have it. Right, and these things they're very, very predictable, right? There's one thing's happening after the other here. So I'll do this. And let's also do this. I'm going to change things up a little bit. So here we'll go delete employee from server. Here, just with jQuery makes it a little bit tougher for me. I'm going to say $Ajax.Ajax. And this is going to be my URL. And this is going to be, my method is going to be delete. And what I'll end up doing here is that this is going to be a, so I'm going to end up deleting this. And here, again, this is just sort of some jQuery nonsense. When I'm successful, so if I go to delete an employee, I could pass the ID in there. That's fine. I mean, if I delete the employee from the server, and then I'll go over here and I'll say, again, I can do this however I want to do it. Well, let's see. My delete is expecting remove an employee and ID. So what I'll do here is that here now I'm going to dispatch. My type is going to be delete. What do I call it? Remove employee. And here I'm going to pass my employee. Again, just the way that I wrote this, I'm just going to make this up and say, here's the ID of the employee. Right, so this is my dispatch. Let me take this out. So we've gotten an employee from the server. Let's see what happens. We're going to dispatch. Delete employee from server with an ID of 2. Let's just see if that works. I can't necessarily be sure, but I would assume that one Ajax request would finish before the other. At least that's what I hope. I could be totally wrong about that. And let's actually put that delete in. So here we'll go in here and we'll say, here's our get. This is going to be our delete. And our delete is going to be here. Again, this is just to see if this works. And here, I'm going to break this up on a couple of lines here. So what do we want to do when we delete? Well, I'm going to say employees equals employees.filter. Employee.id is not equal to, and I don't want the double equal sign because I just have a string. Employee ID is not equal to request params ID. And in this case, I'm going to go in here and I'll say response.send. In this case, I'm just going to do status of 200. So this is going to be a little bit tricky because both these things are happening asynchronously. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. And I'll go over here. I'm going to add this thing synchronously, and then I'll remove just to see that I can make a call to the server. Again, assume that my call to the server is going to end up impacting my database. And here I'm left with no items. Now again, let me take all this stuff out here. This is my store, and my store basically is going to work off of reducers. So again, reducers, very, very simple. Your reducer function is going to look like this. And if you need to have side effects, you're going to use Thunk middleware. You're going to bring it in. You're going to end up adding it to your store, so your store is aware of the middleware. And if you end up dispatching a function, it's going to end up using that middleware. You're not doing it, but the dispatch is going to get passed in there. And if you want to change your store, you're going to do it at the appropriate time with the appropriate action. So we've got now Thunk actions that will load our employees. We've got a Thunk action that's going to delete an employee. And we've got a Thunk action that's going to add an employee, which is a little bit weird, but I'm going to get into the use case for it in a little bit. So on its own, Redux, very predictable, pure functions. Okay? A reducer is going to be working off switch statements, depending, it's always the same. Okay? State, action. You're responsible for the rest. And your main responsibility is to make sure that you have a pure function. Don't mutate. Okay? If the state changes, return a new object. Okay? Redux seem reasonable. Terminology is a little bit weird, Thunk terminology, but basically if you have something asynchronous, put in the middleware, create a Thunk function by having another function that ends up returning your Thunk function. Okay? That Thunk function is going to have your dispatch, and you're going to end up using it.
I thought the point of the store was to kind of manage the state of your entire application.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. We have the ability to do that by doing something called combining our reducers, and we're going to look at that when we end up seeing how this ends up working with React. Okay? So let me stop this recording.